Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. This is a podcast where I read old books, sometimes fiction, sometimes non-fiction, in the most boring way I can, to try help slow your spinning mind enough for you to fall asleep in the most natural way possible. The stresses of life often follow us to bed and keep us company, but I'm here to distract you from them and help you drift away. But before you do fall asleep, if you find Sleepy Time Tales helpful and you'd like to support me, to keep it going out to you and thousands of your fellow insomniacs, please consider signing up on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. If monthly is a big ask, you can also put a tip in the tip jar in the Ko-Fi. These are both linked in the show notes. Or you can support Sleepy Time Tales by simply spreading the word. If you know someone who's struggling to sleep, just tell them about it. And now it's time to move on to some court intrigue in Renaissance Italy. So snuggle down, close your eyes, breathe deeply and listen closely as I lead you down the path to sleep. We return this week to Bellarion the Fortunate, Rafael Sabatini. Chapter 8, Stalemate. Bellarion and Barbaresco sat at supper, waited upon by an untidy and unclean old man, who afforded all the service of that decayed establishment. The fare was frugal, more frugal far than the convent of Sigliano had afforded out of Lent, and the wine was thin and sharp. When the repast was done and the old servant, having lighted candles, had retired, Bellarion startled his host by the portentous gravity of his tone. "My lord, you and I must talk. I told you that Her Highness sends no answer to your message, which is the truth, and all that you could expect, since there was no message and consequently could be no answer. I did not tell you, however, that she sends you a message which is in some sense an answer to certain suspicions that I voiced to her." Barbaresco's mouth fell open, and the stare of his blue eyes grew fixed. Clearly he was startled, and clearly paused to command himself before asking, "Why did you not tell me this before?" "I preferred to wait, so as to make sure of not going supperless. It may of course offend you that I should have communicated my suspicions to Her Highness, but the poor lady was so downcast by your inaction, that to cheer her I ventured the opinion that you are perhaps not quite so aimless as you wish to appear. Whatever his convent education may have done for him, it does not seem, as you will long since have gathered, that it had inculcated a strict regard for exactitude. Dissimulation, I fear, was bred in the bones of him, although he would have answered any such charge by informing you that Plato had taught him to distinguish between the lie on the lips and the lie in the heart." "Oh, but proceed. The opinion?" Barbaresco fiercely challenged him. "You remember what Count Spigno said before you others checked him. The Arbalester, you remember?" Bellarion appeared to falter a little under the glare of those blue eyes, and the fierce set of that heavy jaw. "So I told Her Highness, to raise her drooping spirits, that one of these fine days her friends in Casale might cut the Gordian knot with a crossbow shaft." Barbaresco suggested by his attitude a mastiff crouching for a spring. "Ah," he commented, and she said, "The very contrary of what I expected. Where I looked for elation, I found only distress. It was in vain I pleaded with her that thus a consummation would speedily be reached, that if such a course had not yet been determined, it was precisely the course that I should advocate." "Oh, you pleaded that? And she?" "She bade me tell you that if such a thing were indeed in your minds, you must dismiss it, that she would be no party to it, that sooner she would herself denounce the intention to the Marquis Theodore." Body of God, Barbaresco came to his feet, his great face purple, the veins of his temples standing forth like cords. Whilst appearing unmoved, Bellarion braced his muscles for action. The attack came, but only in words. Barbaresco heaped horrible and obscene abuse upon Bellarion's head. You infamous fool, you triple ass, you chattering ape. With these, amongst other terms, the young man found himself bombarded. Get you back to her and tell her, you numbskulled baboon, that there was never any such intention. But was there not? Bellarion cried with almost shrill ingenuousness of tone. Yet Count Spigno. Devil take Count Spigno, fool. Heed me. Carry my message to her highness. I carry no lies, said Bellarion firmly, and rose with great dignity. Lies? gurgled Barbaresco. Lies, Bellarion insisted. Let us have with them. To her highness I expressed a suspicion. What was in my mind it was a clear conviction. The words Count Spigno used, and your anxiety to silence him, could leave no doubt of any man of wit, and I am that. I hope, my lord, if you will have this message carried, you will first show me the ends you serve by its falsehood, and let me, who am in this thing as deep as any, be the judge of whether it is justified. Before this firmness the wrath went out of Barbaresco. Weakly he wrung his hands a moment, then sank sagging into his chair. If the others, if Cavalcanti or Casella had known how much you had understood, you would never have left this house alive, lest you should do precisely what you have done. But it is on her behalf, hers and her brother's, that you plan this thing. Why should you not take her feeling first? What else is right or fair? Her feeling, Barbaresco sneered, and Bellarion understood that the sneer was for himself. God deliver me from the weariness of reasoning with a fool. A bolt would have been shot, and none could have guessed the hands that loosed it. Now you have made it known, and you need to be told what will happen if we were mad enough to go through with it. Why, the Princess Valeria would be our instant accuser. She would come forth at once and denounce us. That is the spirit of her, willful, headstrong, and mawkish. And I am a fool to bid you go back to her and persuade her that you were mistaken. When the blow fell, she would see what you had first told her was the truth, and our heads would pay. He set his elbows on the table, took his head in his hands, and fetched a groan from his great bulk. The ruin you have wrought, God, the ruin. Ruin, quoth Bellarion. Of all our hopes, Barbaresco explained in petulance. Can't you see it? Can you understand nothing for yourself, animal, save the things you are better for not understanding? And can't you see that you have ruined yourself with us? With your face and shape, and already close in the Lady Valeria's confidence as you are, there are no heights in the state to which you might not have climbed. I had no thought of it, said Bellarion, sighing. No, nor of me, nor of any of us. Of me. The man's grief became passionate. At last I might have slaughtered this beggary in which I live, and now. He banged the table in his sudden rage and got to his feet again. That is what you have done. That is what you have wrecked by your silly babbling. But surely, sir, by other means. There are no other means. Leastways, no other means at our command. Have we the money to levy troops, or why do I waste my breath upon you? You'll tell the others tomorrow what you've done, and they shall tell you what they think of it. It was a course that had its perils, but if once in the stillness of the night Bellarion's shrewd wits counselled him to rise, dress, and be gone, he stilled the coward counsel. It remained to be seen whether the other conspirators would be as easily intimidated as Barbaresco. To ascertain this, Bellarion determined to remain. The Lady Valeria's need of him was not yet done, he thought, though why the Lady Valeria's affairs should be the cause of his exposing himself to the chances of a blade between the ribs was perhaps more than he could satisfactorily have explained. The danger was very far from imaginary, the next morning's conference showed him. Scarcely had the plotters realized the nature of Bellarion's activities than they were clamoring for his blood. Casella, the exile, breathing fire and slaughter, would have sprung upon him with dagger drawn, had not Barbaresco bodily interposed. "Not in my house," he roared, "not in my house," his only concern being the matter of his own incrimination. "Nor anywhere, unless you are bent on suicide," Bellarion calmly warned them. He moved from behind Barbaresco to confront them. "You are forgetting that in my murder the Lady Valeria will see your answer. She will denounce you, sirs, not only for this, but for the intended murder of the Regent. Slay me and you just as surely slay yourselves." He permitted himself to smile as he looked upon their stricken faces. It is an interesting situation, known in chess as a stalemate. In their baffled fury, they turned upon Count Spigno, whose indiscretion had created this situation. Enzo Spigno, sitting there with a sneer on his white face, let the storm rage. When at last it abated, he expressed himself. "Rather should you thank me for having tested the ground before we stand on it. For the rest, it is as I expected. It is an ill thing to be associated with a woman in these matters." "We did not bring her in," said Barbaresco. "It was she who appealed to me for assistance." "And now that we are ready to afford it her," said Casella, "she discovers that it is not the sort she wishes. I say it is not hers to choose. Hopes have been raised in us, and we have labored to fulfill them." How they all harped on that, thought Bellarion. How concerned was each with the profit that he hoped to wrest for himself. How enraged to see himself cheated of his profit. The Lady Valeria, the state, the boy who was being corrupted that he might be destroyed. These things were nothing to these men. Not once did he hear them mentioned now in the futile, disorderly debate that followed, whilst he sat a little apart and almost forgotten. At last it was Spigno, this Spigno whom they dubbed a fool, but who, after all, had more wit than all of them together, who discovered and made the counter-move. "You there, Master Bellarion," he called. "Here is what you are to tell your lady in answer to her threat. We who have set our hands to the task of ridding the state of the Regent's thraldom will not draw back. We go forward with this thing as seems best to us, and we are not to be daunted by threats. Make it clear to this arrogant lady that she cannot betray us without at the same time betraying herself, that whatever fate she invokes upon us will certainly overtake her as well. It may be that she has already perceived and weighed that danger," said Bellarion. "Aye, as a danger, but perhaps not as a certainty. And tell her also that she certainly dooms her brother. Make her understand that it is not so easy to play with the souls of men as she supposes, and that here she has evoked forces which are not within her power to lay again." He turned to his associates. "Be sure that when she perceives precisely where she stands, she will cease to trouble us with her qualms, either now or when the thing is done." Bellarion had mockingly pronounced the situation interesting, when by a shrewd presentiment of it he had given pause to the murderous rage of the conspirators. Considering it later that day as he took the air along the river bank, he was forced to confess it more disturbingly interesting even than he had shown it to be. He had not been blind to that weakness in the Lady Valeria's position, but he had been foolishly complacent, like the skillful chess player who, perceiving a strong move possible to his opponent, takes it for granted that the opponent himself will not perceive it. It seemed to him that nothing remained but to resume his interrupted pilgrimage to Pavia, leaving the state of Montferrat and the Lady Valeria to settle her own affairs. But in that case her own ruin must inevitably follow, precipitated by the action of those ruffians with whom she was allied, whether that action succeeded or failed. Then he asked himself what to him were the affairs of Montferrat and its princess, that he should risk his life upon them. He fetched a sigh. The abbot had been right. There is no peace in this world outside a convent wall. Certainly there was no peace in Montferrat. Let him shake the dust of that place of unrest from his feet, and push on towards Pavia and the study of Greek. And so by olive grove and vineyard he wandered on, assuring himself that it was towards Pavia that he now went, and repeated to himself that he would reach the Cessia before nightfall, and seek shelter in some hamlet thereabouts. Yet dusk saw him re-entering Casale by the Lombard gate, which faces eastward. And this because he realized that the service he had shouldered was a burden not so lightly to be cast aside. If he forsook her now, the vision of her tawny head and wistful eyes would go with him to distract him with reproach. Chapter 9. The Marquis Theodore. The high and mighty Marquis Theodore Paleologo, Regent of Montferrat, gave audience as was his gracious custom each Saturday to all who sought it, and received petitions from all who proffered them. A fine man, this Marquis Theodore, standing fully 6 feet tall, of a good shape and soldierly carriage despite his 50 years. His countenance was amiable and open, with boldly chiseled features and heavily tanned skin. Affable of manner, accessible of person, he nowise suggested the schemer. The privilege of audience which he granted so freely was never abused, so that on the Saturday of this week with which we are dealing, the attendance in the audience chamber was as usual of modest proportions. His Highness came attended by his Chancellor and his Captain of Justice, and followed by 2 secretaries. He made a leisurely progress through the chamber, pausing at every other step to receive this one, or to say a word to that one, and at the end of an hour departed again, one of his secretaries bearing away the single petition that had been proffered, and this by a tall, dark-haired young man who was vividly dressed in scarlet. Within 5 minutes of the Regent's withdrawal, that same secretary returned in quest of the tall young man in red. "Are you named Kane, sir?" The tall young man bowed in acknowledgment and was ushered into a small, pleasant chamber, whose windows overlooked the gardens with which Bellarion had already made acquaintance. The secretary closed the door, and Bellarion found himself under the scrutiny of a pair of close-set pale eyes, whose glance was crafty and penetrating. Cross-legged, the party-coloured hose revealed by the fall of the rich gown of mulberry velvet, the Regent sat in a high-backed chair of leather, wrought with stags' heads in red and gold, his left elbow resting upon a carved writing pulpit. Between hands that were long and fine he held a parchment cylinder, in which Bellarion recognized the pretended petition he had proffered. "Who are you, sir?" The voice was calm and level, the voice of a man who does not permit his accents to advertise his thoughts. "My name is Bellarion Kane. I am the adopted son of Bonifacio Kane, Count of Biandrante." Since he had found it necessary for his present purpose to adopt a father, Bellarion had thought it best to adopt one whose name must carry weight and at need afford protection. Therefore he had conferred this honor of paternity upon that great soldier, Vacuno Kane, who was the ducal governor of Milan. There was a flash of surprise from the eyes that conned him. "You are Ficino's son? You come from Milan, then?" "No, my lord. From the Augustinian convent at Sigliano, where my adoptive father left me some years ago while he was still in the service of Montferrat. It was hoped that I might take the habit, but a restlessness of spirit has urged me to prefer the world." Thus he married the pure truth to the single falsehood he had used, the extent of which was to clothe the obscure soldier who had befriended him with the identity of the famous soldier he had named. But why the world of Montferrat? Chance determined that. I bore letters from my abbot to help me on my way. It was thus I made the acquaintance of the Lord Barbaresco, and his lordship, becoming interested in me, and no doubt requiring me for certain services, desired me to remain. He urged that there was a path already open to my ambition, which, if steadily pursued, might lead to eminence. There was no falsehood in the statement. It was merely truth, untruly told. Truth unassailable under test, yet calculated to convey a false impression. A thin smile parted the prince's shaven lips. And when you had learnt sufficient, you found that a surer path to advancement might lie in the betrayal of these poor conspirators. That, Highness, is to set the unworthiest interpretation upon my motives. Bellarion made a certain show in his tone and manner of offended dignity, such as might become the venal rascal he desired to be considered. You will not dispute that the course you have taken argues more intelligence than honesty or loyalty. Your Highness reproaches me with lack of loyalty to traitors. What was their treason to you? What loyalty do you owe to me? You have but looked to see where lies your profit. Well, well, you are worthy to be the son, adoptive or natural, of that rascal Ficino. You follow closely in his footsteps, and if you survive the perils of the journey, you may go as far. Highness, I came to serve. Silence. The pleasant voice was scarcely raised. I am speaking. I understand your service perfectly. You know something of men, and if I choose to use you, it is because your hope of profit may keep you loyal, and because I shall know how to detect disloyalty and how to punish it. You engage, sir, in a service full of perils. The Regent seemed faintly to sneer. But you have thrust yourself willingly into it. It will test you sternly in at every step. If you survive the tests, if you conquer the natural baseness and dishonesty of your nature, you shall have no cause to complain of my generosity. Bellarion flushed despite himself, under the cold contempt of that level voice, and the amused contempt of those calm, pale eyes. The quality of my service should lead your Highness to amend your judgment. Is it at fault? Will you tell me, then? Whence springs the regard out of which you betray to me the aims and names of these men who have befriended you? Bellarion threw back his head, and in his bold dark eyes was kindled a flame of indignation. Inwardly he was a little uneasy to find the Regent accepting his word so readily, and upon such slight examination. Your Highness, he choked, will you leave me to go? But his Highness smiled, savouring his power to torture souls, where lesser tyrants could torture only bodies. When I have done with you, you came at your own pleasure, you abide at mine. Now tell me, sir, besides the names you have here set down of these men who seek my life, do you know of any others who work in concert with them? I know that there are others whom they are labouring to seduce. Who these others are I cannot say, nor with submission need it matter to your Highness. These are the leaders. Once these are crushed, the others will be without direction. A 7-headed hydra of which these are the heads. If I lop off these heads. He paused. Yes, yes. But have you heard none others named in these councils? He leaned forward a little, his eyes intent upon Bellarion's face. None who are nearer to me? Think well, Master Bellarion, and be not afraid to name names, however great. Bellarion perceived here, almost by instinct, the peril of too great a reticence. Since they profess to labour on behalf of the Marquis Gian Giacomo, it is natural they should name him, but I've never heard it asserted that he has any knowledge of their plot. Nor any other. The Marquis was singularly insistent. Nor any other, he repeated. Bellarion showed a blank face. Why, what other? Nay, sir, I am asking you. No, Highness, he slowly answered. I recall the mention of no other. The prince sank back into his chair, his searching eyes never quitting the young man's face. Then he committed what in a man so subtle was a monstrous indiscretion, giving Bellarion the explanation that he lacked. You are not deep enough in their confidence yet. Return to their councils and keep me informed of all that transpires in them. Be diligent and you shall find me generous. Bellarion was genuinely aghast. Your Highness will delay to strike when by delay you may imperil. He was sternly silenced. Is your counsel sought? You understand what I require of you. You have leave to go now. But Highness, to return amongst them now, after openly coming here to you, will not be without its danger. The Regent did not share his alarm. He smiled again. You have chosen a path of peril, as I told you, but I will keep you. I discover that I have letters from Ficino humbly soliciting my protection for his adoptive son whilst in Casale. It is a petition I cannot disregard. Ficino is a great lord in Milan these days. My court shall be advised of it, and it will not be considered strange that I make you free of the palace. You will persuade your confederates that you avail yourself of my hospitality, so that you may abuse it in their interests. That should satisfy them, and I shall look to see you here this evening. Now go with God. Bellarion stumbled out, distracted. Nothing had gone as he intended after that too promising beginning. Perhaps had he not disclosed himself as Ficino Kane's adoptive son, he would not have supplied the Regent with a pretense that should render plausible his comings and goings. But the necessity for that disclosure was undeniable. His conduct had been dictated by the conviction that he could do for the Lady Valeria what she could not do without self-betrayal do for herself. Confidently, he had counted upon instant action of the Regent to crush the conspirators, and so make the princess safe from the net in which their crazy ambitions would entangle her. Instead, he had made the discovery, from the single indiscretion of the Regent, that the Marquis Theodore was already fully aware of the existence of the conspiracy, and of the identity of some, if not all, of the chief conspirators. That was why he had so readily accepted Bellarion's tale. The disclosure agreed so completely with the Regent's knowledge that he had no cause to doubt Bellarion's veracity. And finding him true in these most intimate details, he readily believed true the rest of his story, and the specious account of his own intervention in the affair. Possibly Bellarion's name was already known to him, as that of one of the plotters who met at Barbaresco's house. Far then from achieving his real purpose, all that Bellarion had accomplished was to offer himself as another, and apparently singularly apt instrument for the Regent's dark purposes. It was a perturbed Bellarion, a Bellarion who perceived in what dangerous waters he was swimming, who came back that noontide to Barbaresco's house. Chapter 10. The Warning. They were very gay that night at the hospitable court of the Marquis Theodore. A comedy was performed early in the evening. A comedy which Father Serafino in his chronicle describes as lascivious, by which he may mean no more than playful. Thereafter there was some dancing in the long hall, of which the Regent himself set the example, leading forth the ugly but graceful young Princess of Morea. His nephew, the Marquis Gian Giacomo, followed with the Countess of Ronseco, who would have declined the honour if she had dared, for the boy's cheeks were flushed, his eyes glazed, his step uncertain, and his speech noisy and incoherent. And there were few who smiled as they observed the drunken antics of their future prince. Once, indeed, the Regent paused, grave and concerned of countenance, to whisper an admonition. The boy answered him with a bray of insolent laughter, and flung away, dragging the pretty countess with him. It was plain to all that the gentle, knightly Regent found it beyond his power to control his unruly, degenerate nephew. Amongst the few who dared to smile was Master Castruccio de Fenestrella. Radiant in a suit of cloth of gold, who stood watching the mischief he had made. For it was he who had secretly challenged Gian Giacomo to a drinking bout during supper, and afterwards urged him to dance with the pretty wife of stiff-necked Ronsecco. A while he stood looking on. Then, wearying of the entertainment, he sauntered off to join a group, a part of which the Lady Valeria was at the centre. Her ladies, Dianara and Isotta, were with her. The pedant Corsario, looking even less pedantic than his habit, and a half-dozen gallants, who among them made all the chatter. Her Highness was pale, and there was a frown between her eyes, that so wistfully followed her unseemly brother, inattentive of those about her, some of whom, from the kindliest motives, sought to distract her attention. Her cheeks warmed a little at the approach of Castruccio, who moved into the group with easy, insolent grace. "My lord is gay tonight," he informed them lightly. None answered him. He looked at them with his flickering, shifty eyes, a sneering smile on his lips. "So not you," he informed them. "You need enlivening." He thrust forward to the princess and bowed. "Will your Highness dance?" She did not look at him. Her eyes were fixed, and their glance went beyond him, and was of such intensity that Messer Castruccio turned to seek the object of that curious contemplation. Down the hall came striding Messer Aliprandi, the orator of Milan, and with him a tall black-haired young man in a suit of red that was more conspicuous than suitable of fashion to the place or the occasion. Into the group about the princess they came, whilst the exquisite Castruccio eyed this unfashionable young man with frank contempt, bearing his pommade to his nostrils, as if to protect his olfactory organs from possible offence. Messer Aliprandi, trimly bearded, elegant in his furred gown and suavely mannered, bowed low before the Lady Valeria. "Permit me, Highness, to present Messer Bellarion Kane, the son of my good friend, Faccio Kane of Biandrante." It was the Marquis Theodore who had requested the orator of Milan, as was proper, seeing that by reason of his paternity Bellarion was to be regarded as Milanese, to present his assumed compatriot to her Highness. Bellarion, modelling himself upon Aliprandi, executed his bow with grace. As Father Serafino truthfully says of him, he learned manners and customs and all things so quickly that he might aptly be termed a fluid in the jug of any circumstance. The Lady Valeria inclined her head with no more a trace of recognition in her face than there was in Bellarion's own. "You are welcome, sir," she said with formal graciousness, and then turned to Aliprandi. "I did not know that the Count of Biandrate had a son." "Nor I, Madonna, until this moment. It was the Marquis Theodore who made him known to me." She fancied in Aliprandi's tone something that seemed to disclaim responsibility. But she turned affably to the newcomer, and Bellarion marvelled at the ease with which she dissembled. "I knew the Count of Biandrante very well when I was a child, and I hold his memory very dear. He was in my father's service once, as you will know. I rejoice in the greatness which he has since achieved. It should make a brave tale." "Per aspera ad astra is ever a brave tale," Bellarion answered soberly. "Too often it is per astra ad aspera, if I may judge by what I have read." "You shall tell me of your father, sir. I have often wished to hear the story of his advancement." "To command, Highness," he bowed again. The others drew closer, expecting entertainment, but Bellarion, who had no such entertainment to bestow, nor knew of Ficino's life more than a fragment of what was known to all in the world, extricated himself as adroitly as he could. "I am no practised troubadour or story singer, and this tale of a journey to the stars should be told under the stars." "Why, so it shall then. They shine brightly enough. You shall show me Ficino's, and perhaps your own." She rose and commanded her ladies to attend her. Castruccio fetched a sigh of relief. "Give thanks," he said audibly to those about him, "for heaven's mercy which has spared you this weariness." The door at the end of the hall stood open to the terrace in the moonlight. Thither the princess conducted Bellarion, her ladies in close attendance. Approaching the threshold, they came upon the Marquis Gian Giacomo, reeling clumsily beside the Countess of Ronsecco, who was almost on the point of tears. He paused in his caperings that he might ogle his sister. "Where do you go, Valeria, and who's this Longshanks?" She approached him. "You're tired, Giannino, and the Countess too is tired. You would be better resting a while." "Indeed, Highness," cried the young Countess, eagerly thankful. But the Marquis was not at all of his sister's wise opinion. "Tired? Resting? You're childish, Valeria. Always childish. Childish and meddlesome, poking your long nose into everything. Someday you'll poke it into something that'll sting it. And what will it look like when it's stung? Have you thought of that?" He laughed derisively and caught the Countess by the arm. "Let's leave Long Nose and Long Shanks, ha." His idiotic laughter shrilled up. He was ravished by his own humor. He let his voice ring out, that all might hear, and share the enjoyment of his comical conceit. Long Nose and Long Shanks. Said she to him, "Your long shanks I adore." Said he to her, "Your long nose I deplore." Screaming with laughter, he plunged forward to resume the dance, trod upon one of his trailing, exaggerated sleeves, tripped himself and went sprawling on the tessellated floor. His laughter louder and more idiotic than ever. A dozen ran to lift him. And in this hiatus in the action, I think it's time to call it a night. As always, if you'd like to carry on where I'm leaving off, you can find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.